Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another in the Policy Dialogue series sponsored by the United Nations Guyana in partnership with the University of Guyana Green Institute on the triple planetary crisis. As you probably know, we are meeting today, we're having this webinar today on precisely the day that is the so-called thematic day for biodiversity at COP27. For us, this means a great deal because we wanted to mark the moment as well. We're doing so in quite a fashion this morning, as we'll hear from our moderator, whom I now introduce. He is none other than the Chancellor of the University of Guyana, Professor Edward Green, a person who actually has done quite a bit since his retirement from the CARICOM Secretariat, where he was an Assistant Secretary General himself, on issues to do with climate change and biodiversity. He has, in particular, a very well thought out blog with many relevant entries. And I hope that those of you who have a chance to do so might follow the link that was shared in the invitation to the GoFAD website. Eddie, good morning, and I'd like to welcome you as moderator. Before I turn it over to you, I'd like to say a warm word of welcome to Kurt, to Annalise, and to other members of the WWF team, especially my good friend and brother, David Singh, who has been really gracious in ensuring that this happens the way it does. It's a fantastic opportunity, David, and I'd like to thank you. I also would like to bid welcome to all of those of you who have joined us this morning, and to say to you that on behalf of Will, the UN Guyana team, UN Guyana office rather, and ourselves, that we hope you really enjoy this webinar and that you leave this webinar with much food for thought. I have very little else to say, Eddie, apart from welcoming everyone, and I know I'm happy to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And I want to join you in the welcome to all our guests, and in particular to Kurt. I had the pleasure last evening of introducing myself to Kurt by looking at a YouTube on his work. It is expansive, it is, and it is really a tribute to one person so young that he could contribute to the triple, what you call the triple planetary crisis, especially focusing on the nature and biodiversity loss. I was particularly interested in the captions of his own career as a forest engineer, as the country director of the Worldwide Fund for Nature in Peru, but in particular as an ecotourism entrepreneur, in which, in fact, when I looked at that video last night, he really practices to implement the science of biodiversity. And I suspect, without going into any further details, because you have listed his essential bio in the invitation, Thomas, and there's no need for me to go through the detail, but to wait for us to listen to this dynamic ecotourism entrepreneur and forest engineer as he deals with biodiversity, conservation, and climate mitigation in a complex world. Over to you, Kirk.
Thank you very much, Edward, and thank you very much, Thomas and David and William. It's great to be here in the Guyanas, at the University of Guyana, in a virtual space, but I feel very much in place. No, thanks for the warm welcome, and it's an opportunity for me to get in touch with a part of the Amazon that is very different, but also feels very much like home. Overall, almost on the opposite side where I've worked most of my life. No, if you look at it from the Southwest, where I've spent 25 years, and you're over on the Northeast. I think at the end of these sessions, I always feel we find all the similarities, but also all the subtle differences. No, and that's what makes it fascinating to work in an ecosystem like the Amazon. Thanks for the warm welcome, and thanks for the space, and welcome everyone. Good morning. Thanks for being here with us today, as a tribute to the special Day on Biodiversity at the COP, and to the moment we live in. We're going to talk about the Amazon, the threats the Amazon faces, a particular moment that we hope to avoid in the Amazon, which is the tipping point, and some of the solutions. No, and we're going to it's going to be an expansive conversation, and we're going to after the presentation, we're going to have a space for a panel and questions and answers. No. So to begin with, let's just remind ourselves what the Amazon is, and depending on who you talk to, some people will keep in their heads, keep in their minds a biome. No, and in this map, the biome is what is limited by the red line. No, others will keep the basin. No, which is what is limited by the blue line. No, and either case, what the Amazon is the largest continuous forest and the longest free-flowing river in the world. No, so it's not only special, but it's unique. No, we can talk a lot about numbers. The Amazon is 6.7 million square kilometers. We can talk a lot about the impressive space it occupies, over 8 countries and an overseas 8 countries and an overseas territories. That's why I say over 8 countries. It's 8 countries and an overseas territories. But I like to remind people of what it means to have a large continuous forest, what it means to have a forest that is not only continuous in space, but in time, a forest which has been allowing to live and thrive for millennia, for geological time. And one of the stories I like to tell is of the ironwood tree in many places in the Amazon. The ironwood tree is it's a legume. It's the genus is a Dipteryx. We call it chihuahuaco in Peruvian Spanish. The English common name is ironwood, and it's a tree that is a cornerstone ecological species. And one of the reasons it's a cornerstone ecological species is because over its lifespan of centuries, its branches fall off. And when the branches fall off, they create holes in the bole of the tree, in the trunk of the tree. And those holes eventually become bigger and bigger, and maybe after 100 years, they become 1 or 2 meter big holes. And when they become holes that are 1 or 2 meters big, then they start being used by macaws to nest in. No, and every year during the wet season, during the rainy season, during the fruiting season, they will have 1 or 2 or 3 macaw chicks. No, so over the span of 300 or 400 years, they will be the home to 300 or 400 generations of macaw families. No, and when you look at prime habitat in the Amazon, when you look at intact forest or very well protected forest or very well managed forest, and it has these old ironwood trees with these holes in them, you can think of the production of macaws coming out of that tree. No, and yet that tree is one that is essential to the floorboard industry. It is a tree that is sought by the floorboard industry. No, So you have this incredible feat of engineering, of natural engineering, that takes centuries to come to fruition, and which is also of prime economic value. No? And you can have a forest that looks very healthy, but if it does not have that tree in it, that forest will have difficulty producing a healthy macaw population. No? And that's the essence of conservation in a biome like the Amazon. That's what it means to have a large, continuous, healthy forest. No? To have a forest that has those ironwood trees, to have a forest that can manage to produce and to protect its complete array of biodiversity. No? So on to the next slide, please. Just now that we have a mental image of what the Amazon is, both kind of technically and from a narrative perspective. Of course, the Amazon is well known not only for its size but also for its diversity. No, both biological and cultural. No, and the Amazon is a place that is why countries like ours are in the list of the world records in mammal diversity and amphibian diversity and bird diversity and freshwater fish diversity. Whatever animal taxa you're talking about, we will probably be on one of those top 10, 15, 20 lists of diversity. No? And it also is a place where you have 47 million people living, no? Of which 2 million are indigenous people. No? So if it were a country, it would be about the size of Colombia in terms of population. No? But it would be a country about the size of Colombia with 500 different cultures in it, 500 different ways of looking at the world, 500 different aspirations and interpretations of the world. No? So the cultural diversity is also one of the reasons why the Amazon is so special. No? And finally, we're going to talk a lot about this during this presentation, the ecosystem services. No? And ecosystem services are essentially services that the natural infrastructure of our world allows us to have to produce our societies on. No? So we will talk a little bit about the we will talk a little bit today about the service of carbon sequestration and climate regulation. No? We will talk about the service of water recycling and also climate regulation. No? We will talk about the service of food provision. No? All these services we take for granted. We almost think of them as default settings of the planet for us to use. No, and there's nothing further from the truth. They are services that can change at a moment's notice. No, not at a moment's notice, but they can change over time, and they can change in such a way as they are very difficult to reestablish. No. So that is a concept of the tipping point that we're going to be talking about later today. No? So when we talk about the Amazon, we talk about its size, we talk about its biodiversity, we talk about its cultural diversity, and we talk about its ecosystem services, about those fundamental services for the establishment of our societies at a continental and maybe even a planetary scale. On to the next one, please. And so this biome, this ecosystem, this huge expanse of forest and this very long and rich river abide in a complex political context. No, and that complex political context is the reality of the 8 countries that we live in. No, countries. Some of our countries have institutional weaknesses that are part of the reality we live in. No, some of them are authoritarian. They have very a small space for civic society. Most of them have lack of environmental regulation, and when they do have environmental regulation, they have a low capacity of enforcing that regulation. No? They are like many frontier areas. They are a place where organized crime can operate. No, and wherever organized crime can operate, there's space for corruption. No, and finally, they are dependent. They have economies that are dependent on commodities. They have economies that are depending on exporting their products outside of the country or outside the biome. No, so very economies that are essentially extractive. No, whether they are mining type of industries or agro type of industries or timber industry. In most cases, the main economies of the Amazon biome are extractive economies. They can be described as extractive economies. So we operate in a complex political context. We operate in a complex economic context when we work out of the Amazon, and that generates a series of threats. No, and that's onto the next slide, please. And those threats are numerous. They're interconnected. We're going to be looking at 4 of them specifically, but first I want to go through the whole list of them. The main one, the principal one, is the expansion of the agriculture frontier, and that includes cattle. So the cattle and agriculture frontier. Another threat is the expansion of illegal crops such as coca. We have the threat of forest fires, which is very linked to the way we produce agriculture. And then we have the indirect threat of infrastructure, which it's a direct and an indirect threat. The Amazon needs infrastructure, and our countries need infrastructure. But in the Amazon, when we put a road, which is very useful for moving things around, it also creates a wave of deforestation. No, there's a very familiar, a very well-known statistic that is that 80% of deforestation is 20 kilometers from a road. And some papers will even postulate that 95% of deforestation is within 5 kilometers of a road. And also, so roads and deforestation and the expansion of the agricultural and cattle ranching frontier and of illegal activities are very, very close to each other. No, we mentioned extractive activities such as gold mining or oil extraction and other types of mining as well. The waste produced by gold mining, mostly mercury contamination, overfishing, type of threat we don't talk much about, but which is really important in an ecosystem like the Amazon, and for people like Amazonian people that eat fish 3 times a day. No, some of the highest per capita consumptions of fish in our continent are in Amazonian cities. No. So we tend to think of our coastal cities as places where people eat lots of fish, but Amazonian cities eat more fish per capita than our coastal cities. So overfishing is a threat that's very closely related to our food security. No, illegal hunting, which is of particular importance to the biggest mammals and the biggest birds. Land grabbing and speculation. Again, like any frontier area, land grabbing and speculation is a huge problem. I always like to come to a story from our own Amazon here in Peru, where I've witnessed Amazonian land that is the property of the Peruvian military being subject to land grabbing without any remedy. No, so land grabbing and speculation is rampant in many places in the Amazon. And finally, another illegal activity, which is logging. No, there's many places where logging is done in a managed, certified way, but there are many more places where it's done illegally and unsustainably. And finally, a threat that is planetary, but that has direct repercussions in the Amazon is human-induced climate change. No. And human-induced climate change is a part of what we will talk about when we talk about the tipping point. So I'm going to leave that for a little later and pass on to the next slide, where we're going to start focusing on the main threats in the Amazon. And of course, the main threat in the Amazon is deforestation. And deforestation is linked to principally to the expansion of the agriculture and cattle ranching frontiers. Depending on the country, the driver will be different. So Brazil's deforestation drivers are closely related to cattle ranching and soybean plantation. Peru's are more related to coffee, cacao, and cattle ranching. Ecuador's are more related to palm oil and cacao, and so on. No. This map, what's in red in this map are the areas that have been deforested. What's in yellow is healthy forest. No, so you see an arc of deforestation around the southeastern part of the Amazon and a little bit on the western side of the Amazon in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, where the Andes come down to the Amazon. That's where people are migrating into the Amazon and generating this this wave of deforestation. In Brazil, it's from the more urban areas in the southeastern part of Brazil, migrating and industrial scale cattle ranching and farmer migrating into the Amazon. No, related again to roads and often done by fires, which sometimes come out of control and create massive forest fires. No, so all these agriculture, cattle ranching, fires, and deforestation are all related in one way or another. No. Now, if you look at Guyana, you'll be happy to see it's mostly yellow. So fairly healthy, fairly immune, or it's been well vaccinated from that threat. No. Another thing I wanted to point out in this map is if you look at the Brazilian part of the map and look at the southeastern side, and you see the wave coming in, and then you see a shape that is in yellow within that wave. It's a part of the southeastern section there. Thank you for the cursor. It's right on it right now. Those are protected areas in indigenous territories. So you can see how effective those types of land tenure have been in combating deforestation. No, so we will talk about this a little more during the tipping point. But at this point, about 17 to 18% of the Amazon have already been deforested. No, and as you will hear a little later on, the tipping point is speculated. It's our science tells us that the tipping point may be reached when we hit 20% of Amazonian deforestation. So we're at 17 to 18% of the ecosystem being converted to non-forest, no, and we're close to what is predicted or projected to be a 20% tipping point. We'll talk about a little bit more about that later, but keep that in mind. The next one, please. And this map of forest fires is almost a mirror map of the one we just passed, no? And you can see how forest fires and deforestation are virtual mirrors, no? And the reason is, there's two reasons for that. Number one is because fires are what is used to clear forest, no? Fires and chainsaws. But the other reason is also because areas that are deforested are much more susceptible to forest fires than areas that are not. No, and again, you can see the same areas of yellow that have been protected from forest fires are the same areas that have forests. No, so forest fires, both a cause and a consequence of deforestation. The next one, please. This is a threat I love to talk about, and I'm a forest engineer that was trained in forestry back in the late 80s, early 90s. And when I was trained and when I did my career, it was all about forests. And we never talked about the Amazon River. We never talked about the Amazon River I don't even want to say it was an afterthought. It was not part of our conversation, no? And over the years, we've come to try to fix that. We've tried to come to understand or put the river where it needs to be at, which is at the center of the equation. The Amazon is a fluvial ecosystem. It's not only home to 20% of the world's freshwater fish, it's also home to, it's home to 20% of the water that is discharged into the Atlantic. 20% of the water that is discharged, of the fresh water that is discharged into the Atlantic comes from the Amazon. There's also an important stat on the freshwater fish, but I'm getting it confused. No? Now, the Amazon is also a floodplain. No, there's a huge expanse, a vast expanse of the Amazon that is a floodplain, and that floodplain is what keeps many of the Amazon's populations of wildlife thriving. No, there are fish in the Amazon that eat fruits that fall from trees. Because that's their natural history. No, so if those trees disappear or that floodplain fails to flood, then they go under stress. No, species like the jaguar, like the anaconda, depend on the floodplain for their food. So if the Amazon's flooding pulse, if the Amazon's flooding capacity is changed, then the Amazon as an ecosystem is changed. No, and one of the main threats to that pulse, to that connectivity, are dams. No, so there's a measure we use to keep we use to define rivers as free flowing or not free flowing. That is the connectivity of the rivers. How well are the rivers connected, both vertically and horizontally? So, kind of from the headwaters to the lowlands, but also during or at the floodplain, how much it expands, how much how much of its floodplain it covers. No, and that index tells us that 2 of the long rivers in the Amazon. So the Amazon basin has many rivers that feed into it: the Negro River, the Marañón River, the Madeira River, the Xingu River. No, in Brazil, in Peru, in Bolivia, in Colombia, so 2 out of those very long rivers that feed into the Amazon, and 2 out of the long rivers and 4 out of the very long rivers are no longer free flowing. No. And 7 of the remaining free-flowing rivers could lose their connectivity. So focusing on those, on the connectivity of the rivers, focusing on keeping that river healthy and keeping it, keeping those threats low, is very important also to the stability and to the resilience of the Amazon basin and the Amazon biome. On to the next slide, please. And I mentioned infrastructure as an important threat, and then I just talked about dams. That's one type of infrastructure that we have to keep in mind when we talk about infrastructure. But the other one is roads. No, and again, roads are closely related to deforestation. They're correlated to deforestation. They are not the direct cause of deforestation. So you can build a road with very low impact on the forest. But when you build a road, you make it very easy for for migration. You make it very, where you build when you build a road in a low governance environment, you make it very easy for illegal activities to thrive, and you make it and you make the economy. You produce a driver for change in the economy, no? And that means that yes, you are going to find it easier to transport goods, but those goods might be goods coming out of well-managed, sustainable areas. They also might be goods that are the result of illegal activities. They also might drive waves of squatters into a territory. So roads and deforestation are closely connected. And when we plan our roads, we need to plan them with that in mind as well. No? So planning dams and planning roads well, designing them properly, designing them so that the environmental and the governance conditions around them are taken into account during the design phase, so that they so that we can mitigate to the best possible extent their economic and social and environmental impact, then is what we need to do. That's how we need to think about infrastructure in the Amazon. We need to think about well-designed, properly designed, well-thought-out infrastructure that takes all these variables into account. Otherwise, it's just a driver for low-quality economic growth that is netted negative by the environmental effects of deforestation. And so those are the four main threats we wanted to talk about. And with that, we're going to pass on to the next slide and change the topic a little bit and talk about the effects of climate in the Amazon. No? And again, these effects of climate have two drivers. One is a planetary driver of climate change. So as we are well aware of, because of carbon emissions all around the world, we have a greenhouse effect, which is generating change, climate change all over the world. And in the Amazon, it takes a specific form. But also in the Amazon, the fact we are losing forest creates a different and a driver of climate change, which feeds into the planetary system and which also creates a positive feedback loop within the Amazon system. And I'm going to try to explain that here. And these are my first few times trying to explain that. So I hope I'm up to the task. In the Amazon is a biome that, to an extent, creates its own climate. No, so as we all know, the Amazon it's hot, and the Amazon is humid. No, and the heat comes from the fact it's in the tropics. The humidity comes from different reasons. One of them is that you have humid air being blown in from the Atlantic. No. And when that humid air is being blown in from the Atlantic, when it's subject to the heat, it creates rain. No, that rain is part of the reason we have these lush forests. But these lush forests act as a pump. They suck the water from the ground and pump it back into the atmosphere because of the heat. No, so it's evaporating back into the atmosphere. No, and that's moving from the east to the west. No, by the winds. No, so imagine these circles of water of the water cycle moving. These cycles of the water cycles moving by the wind from the east to the west. No, and being pumped up to the atmosphere by the trees. No, when you lose those trees, you lose the pump. No, and when you lose the pump, you start losing the ability for the Amazon to rain on itself, so to speak. No, so that's the kind of the self-generated climate of the Amazon. No, and when you lose those trees and when you have this planetary effect of climate change in the Amazon, you have these 4 effects in the Amazon. No, you have longer dry season. No, so the dry season expands from in Peru, for example, our dry season is typically of 5 to 6 months, and it's expanded to 6 and 7 months. No? That expansion of the dry season in some parts of the Amazon, especially in the south, it starts making the forest. The south is where it's driest, so it starts turning the forest into a savanna. No, there's a temperature increase. So as the temperature increases, it's easier for fires. As it's easier for fires, there's more deforestation. So you get a negative feedback loop. No, you have more severe droughts. No. So instead of having 7 days or 8-day periods of dryness during the dry season, you start having 20 days of periods of dry. Again, good for fires, no? And finally, you have these hydrological events. So for example, I'm going to describe an event that is very common in the Amazonian South, and it's linked to hydrology somewhat, but it's also linked to cold weather. And it's the fact that in the south we have cold fronts coming up from the south, no, and because there's less humidity in the air, they just become they come up from the south with more ease, no. So 20 years ago, we would talk of a typical year having 3 to 4 cold fronts in the Amazon. Nowadays, we have 20 to 25 cold fronts in the same part of the Amazon. No, so all these are changes that are happening in the Amazon due to planetary climate change and due to the change of the kind of the self-generated Amazon climate. No, on to the next one, please. So this leads us to the tipping point, and this is kind of what might be the newsworthy part of the presentation. No, this is what's really different about this year and maybe the last 10 years. No, and the tipping point is a concept which it really comes from systems studies, but in the case of our work, we're going to say it's a concept from the study of ecosystems, no? And the tipping point is the point at which an ecosystem loses its resilience. It loses its capacity to come back to its healthy state, no? It loses its capacity to rebound, no? So the tipping point is the point when the Amazon will lose its capacity to. So I'm going to simplify it with an analogy, but I'm going to call it to self-heal, to heal itself, no? And that tipping point may turn the Amazon from a tropical rainforest into a savanna in certain places, no? It may change the nature of the ecosystem to the point where it may not be able to return to being a tropical rainforest, no? And in other places, it may change it from it being a floodplain to it being a savanna again. It's no longer a fluvial water ecosystem. It's now a savanna where there is no floodplain. No, so these are different ways in which the tipping point may manifest itself in different points of the Amazon. But another concept of the tipping point, another principle of the tipping point, is that it occurs at a certain level, at a certain moment, no, when a certain threshold is crossed, no, and we're calling that in this threshold in this slide triggering condition, no. So the tipping point has 5 triggering conditions, and it may be that one of these triggering conditions triggers a tipping point, or it may be that all 5 of them put together trigger the tipping point. Again, this is a science of projection. It's a science of prediction. It's a science of trying to evaluate different scenarios. No, so it's not a science of what has happened. It's a science of what could happen. No, And I'm going to describe those 5 triggering conditions now. By the way, this is not in sequence. This is not in this slide looks like a sequence, but there are 5 different triggering conditions. I've noticed the graphic leads people to arrive at a mistaken conclusion that these 5 triggering conditions are in sequence. They're not. They're just 5 triggering conditions. No. And also a super important mention here that I want to underline and I want to put in bold is that this science has been produced by a body of scientists that is called the Science Panel for the Amazon. No? And the Science Panel for the Amazon produced a tipping point, a report last year on the Amazon where the tipping point was one of the central issues of the report. No? So this is based on the conclusions and the research of the Science Panel for the Amazon. But again, the 5 triggering conditions, one of them is annual precipitation of less than 1,000 to 1,500 millimeters a year. Now that may not be an issue in close to the equator, no, where the precipitation is has much more volume. It's much larger, no. But south of the equator, on the southern border of the Amazon in Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil, our annual precipitation is about 2,000 to 2,500 millimeters. So if you lose about 20% of that precipitation, you hit the tipping point for that. You hit the triggering condition for that area, no? And that might turn those parts of the forest into a savanna. Again, a dry season that has a length that's lengthier than 7 months, no? Another triggering condition. So once the dry season becomes larger than 7 months, some of the trees will not be able to survive that dry season. Some of the trees will not be able to produce the fruit in the way they do during that dry season. No, another triggering condition is a water deficit of greater than 200 millimeters a year. So more transpiration, more evapotranspiration than rain, creating a water deficit. And then a global increase of 2 degrees Celsius in the Earth. No, so if the planet increases in more than 2 degrees, then we start losing forest, and we may start driving into less rain, and we may start generating some of the other conditions. And finally, a cumulative basin-wide deforestation of 20 to 25%. Again, if we lose 20 to 25% of the forest coverage of the basin, it may not be able to generate its own climate the way it does now, and we may start triggering that tipping point. No, and that tipping point may affect parts of the Amazon. It may affect a significant part of it. No, it's a predictive and projective science, so difficult to get into certainties. No, what is worrying is that we're very close to these triggering conditions in many places, especially the 20 to 25% deforestation loss. The next one, please. So here's a different look at the tipping point science and the tipping point map. And this is a map of places where we have looked at 3 of these conditions, no? And where the map has a square, a pixel in a light red or pink, it means that pixel meets one of the 3 conditions. And the conditions in this case are less than 1,500 millimeters of rain, 20% of more or deforestation, or a dry season of more than 7 months. So if it's pink, it meets one of those 3 conditions. If it's darker red, it means 2 of those 3 conditions. And if it's really dark red, it means 3 of those 3 conditions. Again, you have some of those conditions being met in Guyana, in the southern part of Guyana especially. You have countries like Bolivia, where much of the map has those. As you can see, the south of the Amazon meets much of those conditions. No? On to the next one, please. So we've talked about the threats, we've talked about the Amazon, we've talked about its threats, we've talked about the tipping point and the triggering conditions. Now we talk a little bit about solutions. What we have found that works, what we need to work on, and what we need to work on harder. No, and our solutions, we like to describe in forests, rivers, and society solutions. No, we need all three of those conditions healthy. No, and societies, of course, have to do with the way we govern ourselves, and also the way we prosper our economy. No, healthy societies are prosperous, well-governed economies. So on to the next one, please. We're going to go through one of the solutions that has proven to be very effective is this is a map of protected areas. It's also a map of indigenous territories. Protected areas are in green, indigenous territories are in diagonal lines. About 50% of the Amazon now is a protected area or a titled indigenous territory. No, and if you look at the performance of these types of land, they have very low deforestation rates. No, so remember when we saw that map of deforestation in the Amazon, there were some areas that were deforested, but they had some healthy forest areas within them. Those healthy forest areas, as you can see here, were protected areas and indigenous lands. The next one, please. So protected areas and entitled indigenous territories, one proven solution. Another way of working where you don't have protected areas and indigenous territories, and where you do have them as well, is to work at a landscape approach, to work on sustainable landscapes. And where you have deforestation on these landscapes, you try to make you try to help farmers, and you try to understand how farmers and cattle ranchers can become more productive, and how they can eliminate conversion. How can they eliminate deforestation from their production system? No, where there's forest, you try to harvest timber or other non-timber forest products from the forest without producing degradation, without losing the ecosystem's integrity. No, you manage the territory so that the territory is well monitored, so that it has verification systems for the places where it has infractions to the legal system. You have a system to report infractions. No, and where there's deforestation, where you have ecosystem conversion, you also work on restoring it. No, and restoration frequently can be combined with increasing the productivity and the economic value of that piece of land. So an integrated approach to a sustainable landscape is also important in the Amazon. And the next one, please. We've talked about two solutions, protected areas and indigenous territories. We've talked about a third approach to a solution, the integrated landscape approach. We also have to keep an eye on the biodiversity. No, and the way we at WWF keep an eye on the health, the biodiversity's health, is with what we call umbrella species. So species like the river dolphins in rivers, and like the jaguar in forests, that where their presence means that the ecosystem is in good shape. So if there's a forest with a healthy population of jaguar, or if there's a river with a healthy population of dolphins, we're pretty sure that the beetles, the dung beetles, and the macaws, and the toucans, and the antbirds, and the armadillos are in good shape. In the case of the jaguar, and in the case of the dolphin, we're pretty sure, and I'm going to have to say my fish species name in Spanish, but I will say them anyway because they're great fish. But we're pretty sure the carachama and the pacos and the dorados and the, I'm trying to think of something that's not a fish, the anacondas are in good shape in the rivers. No, so these are all monitoring and also making sure that the threats to jaguars and dolphins, which are sometimes a little different to the threats of forests and rivers, are taken care of, is also an important solution. No? So you can have a river that's very healthy, but people may be killing dolphin for bait. No? Or you can have a forest that's really healthy, but people may be killing jaguar for the international and illegal trade in jaguar pieces. And in those maps, you see the strongholds, the population strongholds of river dolphins and of jaguars, no, which is where we try to focus some of our conservation work at an Amazonian scale. And the next one, please. Cross-cutting strategies, healthy societies, no? One really important thing, one really important aspect to keep in mind is that we need to learn so much still about the Amazon and about our societies and about what we want our future to look like in the Amazon. No, and it's essential. An essential part of that solution is to work with and help further the movements and the efforts of organizations like the Science Panel for the Amazon. No, so academic research, practical research, the generation of information and the communication of that information, such as the one of the Science Panel for the Amazon, is super important. That's another important solution that we work on. And finally, the final slide here is on working with organizations that represent indigenous people. The next slide, please. At a biome level, at the level of Amazonia, there is a federation called COICA that coordinates the work of the national indigenous peoples federations in each Amazonian country. And at a national level, each one of those federations typically coordinates at a basin level what indigenous people aspire. No, that they have a vision, they have an agenda, they have a very clear perspective on how they want their future to be, even at the scale of 500 different cultures. There are certain commonalities in that vision, and that is represented in this case in the 80 by 25 initiative by COICA. That is another important piece of work and a partner that we work with. No, so the 80-25 initiative, by the way, is a motion now that has been signed by many organizations, including WWF, and it's an IUCN motion. And many of the specifics in that motion are similar to what we've just discussed. And finally, the next slide, please. I want to thank the Guyana team for allowing me to speak a little bit about their work, but it's really they that should be explaining this, and they that should be kind of bathing in the light of their work. For logistical reasons, I'm going to do it. But at WWF Guiana, we do work on some of these solutions at the national level in Guyana. No, and so we talked about jaguar and dolphin, and the Guyana team works in sync, in line, aligned with the Jaguar 2030 roadmap, which is a roadmap of many organizations that allows us to have a vision of how to conserve the jaguar at a biome scale. Now, and part of that work, for example, is understanding and monitoring how the populations are faring in the landscape that is formed by Guyana, Suriname, and Brazil, the southern part of Guyana and Suriname, and a bit of the northeastern part of Brazil. No, super important landscape for jaguar populations. We put camera traps and try to understand how the population is doing and what's causing it to do well or not do well. No, similar story for river dolphins, where through tagging and through expeditions we keep an eye on the populations of river dolphins throughout the Amazon, including in Guyana. And two other types of work in Guyana is the work of forest management and monitoring. Forest monitoring, we talked a little bit about, important to keep an eye on deforestation and degradation of the forest with satellite systems and satellite photography. No, but also alert systems, no, to understand where there are recent deforestation events, and the management of forests. No, so finding ways to add value to standing forests so that those forests are kept standing and thriving. And finally, working with a fourth line of work in Guyana is working with the artisanal gold miners to phase out the use of mercury in artisanal gold mining, which is a problem, an Amazonian level problem in many of the sub basins. The final slides are slides, the final two slides are slides of Guyana, which this is gold mining. This is part of the landscape where we work in gold mining. And then a couple of slides to inspire us, to inspire me in particular to visit Guyana. The next one. Those are the inspirational slides, which when I saw them, I immediately put them on my bucket list. So I hope to be able to see those beautiful Amazonian landscapes someday in my life. I come from a country that is famous for its mountains and its forests and its oceans and its rivers, no? And I see that you are the same. You have mountains, forests, oceans, and rivers, just like we do. And it's part of where we should all spend the time we have allotted on this planet. So with those words, I'm going to thank you for your attention. And at this point, I'm going to have one final request of you. After we finish the presentation, please pass on to the last slide where we have the link of oh, that's another beautiful slide. Sorry, I did not mean to miss that one. I know the mountain is Mount Roraima. I can't remember the name of this beautiful site, but again, needs to be on a bucket list. And that's what I wanted to get to that link. I wanted to encourage you to download the Living Amazon report, which is a report we just put out. It has a lot of the information, the infographics we showed come from this report. It's chock full of information on the Amazon and the state of the Amazon, the solutions we talked about. And it's just a good handbook to have close to you to look up the answers to many of the Amazon questions that we have been talking about. No, it's designed to be very informative, but also very easy to read, very quick to get to what you need to get to when you're looking for information. So with that encouragement, I would want to pass it over back to Edward for your moderation, Edward, of the next few minutes. Thank you very much for your attention.